The throne room of the Cytherean palace stretched before Commander James Fletcher like a cathedral carved from living crystal. Light refracted through the translucent walls in patterns that seemed to breathe, casting shifting hues of violet and gold across the polished obsidian floor. He had been summoned here 3 times since his arrival on Cythera Prime, each visit increasing his unease. The planet's ruling monarch, Queen Larasia, had taken what his diplomatic briefing had called an unusual interest in the human military advisor assigned to oversee the integration of Earth technology with Cytherian defense systems. James stood at attention, his gray uniform a stark contrast to the ethereal beauty surrounding him. The Cytherians were a humanoid species, similar enough to humans that interspecies cooperation was possible, different enough that every interaction felt charged with alien mystery. Their skin held an opalescent quality, shifting subtly in the light. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, with irises that seemed to contain entire galaxies of color. They moved with an otherworldly grace that made even the most mundane gesture appear choreographed. The doors at the far end of the throne room opened without a sound. Queen Larasia entered, and despite his military discipline, James felt his breath catch. She was stunning by any standard, human or alien. Her hair fell in waves of deep purple-black to her waist, occasionally catching the light to reveal strands of silver that seemed to move of their own accord. Her gown flowed around her like liquid starlight, changing color with each step. But it was her eyes that held him, large and luminous, colored a shade of amber that seemed to glow from within. She ascended the 3 steps to her throne with liquid grace, but instead of sitting, she stood before it, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. 3 of her advisors followed her into the room, taking positions along the walls. James recognized the protocol. This was to be a formal audience. "Commander Fletcher," she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality common to her people, like music underlying speech. "Your reports on the defense grid integration have been exemplary. My military council speaks highly of your expertise." "Thank you, Your Majesty," James replied, maintaining his rigid posture. "The Cytherian engineers have been quick learners. The project is ahead of schedule." "Yes," she said, descending the steps toward him. "Which is why I find myself curious about something that does not appear in your reports." James felt a prickle of apprehension. "Your Majesty?" She circled him slowly, her gown whispering against the floor. "You work with dedication that borders on obsession, Commander. You volunteer for additional duties. You spend your recreation time reviewing technical specifications. Your subordinates report that you rarely sleep more than 4 hours a night." She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could detect her scent, something like night-blooming flowers mixed with ozone. "One might think you are running from something." The observation struck too close to home. James kept his expression neutral. "I take my assignment seriously, Your Majesty. The defense of Cythera Prime is crucial to the alliance between our worlds." "Indeed," she said softly. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that felt invasive. "But that does not explain why you refuse all social invitations, why you take your meals alone, why you have never once joined your fellow humans for their gatherings." She tilted her head, a gesture that reminded him disconcertingly of a bird of prey. "What are you hiding from, Commander?" "I'm not hiding from anything, Your Majesty." "Liar." The word was said without heat, almost gently. She turned away from him, moving back toward her throne. "I have access to your personnel file, Commander Fletcher. The complete file, not the sanitized version provided to my military council." She sat, arranging her gown with deliberate care. "It mentions a bereavement leave. 6 months ago." just before you volunteered for this assignment." James felt his jaw tighten, his hands, clasped behind his back, clenched into fists. "With respect, Your Majesty, my personal history has no bearing on my ability to fulfill my duties." "Perhaps not," she agreed, "but it has bearing on my curiosity." She leaned forward slightly, her amber eyes never leaving his face. "Tell me about her." The command was clear, despite the soft tone. James struggled with the conflicting demands of protocol and privacy. Queens commanded, subjects obeyed. But this felt like a violation, an intrusion into the most painful part of his soul. "Her name was Sarah," he heard himself say, the words coming out flat and lifeless. "Dr. Sarah Chen." She was a xenobiologist assigned to the first contact team on Kepler Station. "Was," Larasia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was an accident, a containment breach. She was studying samples from a newly discovered world. The microorganisms were more aggressive than anyone anticipated." James stared at a point on the wall above the Queen's head, unable to meet her gaze. "She died before they could get her to medical. They told me it was quick. They told me she didn't suffer. They told me a lot of things." The throne room was silent except for the soft hum of energy that seemed to permeate all Cytherian buildings. When Larasia spoke again, her voice had changed, become softer, almost tentative. "You loved her. I was going to marry her." The words came out rougher than he intended. "We had plans, a life mapped out, children someday, a house on Earth near the ocean, research positions that would let us travel the stars together. All of it, gone in an instant because of organisms too small to see. And so you volunteered for an assignment on the far edge of civilized space," Larasia said. "As far from home as possible, where you could work yourself to exhaustion and never have to feel anything at all." James said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had summarized his existence for the past 6 months with perfect accuracy. "Look at me, Commander." It was a direct order. James lowered his gaze to meet hers and was surprised by what he saw there. Not pity, which he would have hated. Not sympathy, which he had endured too much of already. Something else. Something that looked almost like challenge. "You are dismissed," she said abruptly. "Return to your duties. We will speak again soon." James saluted and left the throne room, feeling her eyes on his back until the doors closed behind him. He told himself the tremor in his hands was fatigue, nothing more. Over the following weeks, the Queen's interest in him did not wane. If anything, it intensified. She began appearing at his worksite, ostensibly to review progress on the defense grid. Her visits were always brief, always professional, but James could feel the weight of her attention like a physical thing. She would ask pointed questions about the technical specifications, demonstrating a grasp of the systems that surprised him. But interwoven with the professional inquiries were more personal questions, delivered with such casual elegance that refusing to answer felt churlish. She asked about his childhood on Earth, about his training at the academy, about the missions that had earned him his rank and reputation. He answered because protocol demanded it, keeping his responses brief and factual. But with each conversation, he found himself revealing slightly more, the edges of his carefully maintained walls eroding under her persistent interest. One evening, he was summoned to her private study rather than the formal throne room. It was a smaller space, lined with shelves containing artifacts from across the galaxy. A window stretched along one wall, offering a view of Cythera Prime's 3 moons rising over the capital city. The Queen was standing at the window when he arrived, wearing a simpler gown than her formal attire, though no less beautiful. "Do you find my world beautiful, Commander?" she asked without turning. James approached to stand a respectful distance behind her. Through the window, the city sprawled in elegant curves and spirals, its buildings grown rather than constructed, shaped from the same living crystal as the palace. Lights were beginning to glow within them as night fell, creating a constellation that mirrored the stars above. "It's extraordinary, Your Majesty. Very different from Earth. You miss your home." It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. "Sometimes. Earth is more chaotic, less elegant. But it's familiar." "Familiar," she repeated, finally turning to face him. "Is that what you seek, Commander? Familiarity? The known and comfortable?" "I seek to fulfill my assignment to the best of my abilities, Your Majesty." She laughed, a sound like bells chiming in harmony. "Ever the soldier. Do you ever allow yourself to simply exist, Commander Fletcher? To experience something without filtering it through duty and protocol?" "Not if I can help it," he said, the honesty surprising him. "Because experience leads to feeling, and feeling leads to pain." She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the faint luminescence of her skin in the growing darkness. "You've built a fortress around yourself, haven't you? Stone walls and iron discipline. No entrance, no exit. Safe and dead inside." "Your Majesty, I don't think this is appropriate." "I'm not interested in what's appropriate," she interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time since he'd met her. "I'm interested in the truth. You stand before me, a man who has deliberately killed everything inside himself that makes him human, and you speak to me of duty and protocol as if they were shields that could protect you from reality. What do you want from me?" The question came out more forcefully than he'd intended, edged with frustration and something else he didn't want to examine too closely. Larasia studied him with those luminous amber eyes. When she spoke, her voice was soft again, but there was steel underneath the silk. "I want you to feel something. Anything. I want to shatter that fortress you've built and drag you back into the world of the living." "Why?" He was genuinely confused. "Why would you care? I'm just a human military advisor. I'll complete my assignment and leave. Why does my emotional state matter to you?" She turned back to the window, her profile silhouetted against the lights of the city. "Because I cannot bear waste, Commander, and you are wasting yourself. Whatever you were before she died, you were something more than this hollow shell performing duties. You were a man capable of love, of passion, of life. That man is still in there somewhere, buried under grief and guilt and the cowardice of shutting yourself away." Cowardice. The word stung, as she'd clearly intended it to. "Yes, cowardice. You're afraid. Afraid that if you open yourself up even a crack, the grief will consume you. Afraid that feeling anything at all will mean confronting what you've lost. So you hide. You perform your duties with mechanical precision and tell yourself you're being professional when really you're just being terrified." James felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. It was the first strong emotion he'd allowed himself to feel in months, and it felt almost good. "You have no right to make these judgments about me. You don't know what I've been through." "Don't I?" She whirled to face him, and he was startled to see genuine anger in her eyes. "You think you're the only being in the universe who has lost someone? The only one who has had their future ripped away? I am 300 years old by your calendar, Commander. I have loved and lost more times than you can imagine. I have watched people I cared for die of age, of accident, of war. I have felt that same hollow emptiness you're so carefully cultivating. The difference between us is that I chose to live despite it, and you have chosen to die while still breathing." They stared at each other across the dimly lit study, the tension between them crackling like electricity. James wanted to maintain his anger, to use it as armor against her accusations. But underneath the anger was the terrible suspicion that she was right. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally, the fight draining out of him. "I want you to try," she said simply. "I want you to stop hiding and try to be alive again." She moved closer, and this time he didn't step back. "I'm going to make you a challenge, Commander Fletcher. I'm going to do everything in my power to make you feel something, to break through that fortress and remind you what it means to be human, to be alive. And if I refuse, you won't." There was absolute certainty in her voice. "Because underneath all that grief and self-imposed isolation, you're still curious, still intelligent, still fundamentally incapable of backing down from a challenge. It's in your psychological profile. It's why you excel as an officer. It's why you took impossible missions and succeeded. It's why you're going to accept this challenge even though every instinct tells you to run." She was right, and they both knew it. James felt something shift inside him, like a door creaking open after being locked for too long. "This is inappropriate," he said, but the words had lost their conviction. "Perhaps," Larasia agreed, "but I've never been very good at appropriate." She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look younger and more mischievous. "Starting tomorrow, your schedule is being modified. 2 hours each evening will be blocked off for cultural education sessions with me personally. We'll call it diplomatic preparation. My council will accept that." "Cultural education," James repeated skeptically. "Among other things." Her smile widened. "Dismissed, Commander. And do try to get some sleep tonight. You're going to need your strength." As James left her study, he had the disturbing sensation that he'd just agreed to something far more significant than diplomatic lessons. The feeling persisted during his walk back to his quarters, and it wasn't until he was lying in his narrow bed that he realized what it was. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something other than numbness. Anxiety, yes. Apprehension, certainly. But also the faintest spark of something that might have been anticipation. The next evening, James reported to the Queen's study as instructed. He'd spent the day in a state of unusual distraction, his mind wandering from technical specifications to the upcoming appointment. He told himself it was simply uncertainty about what to expect. He absolutely did not acknowledge the small flutter of nervousness in his stomach. Larasia was waiting for him, seated in a low chair near the window. A second chair had been placed across from hers, with a small table between them bearing a crystal decanter and 2 glasses. She gestured to the empty chair as he entered. "Sit, Commander. We're going to start simply tonight. Conversation. Nothing more threatening than words." James sat, maintaining his military posture even in the informal setting. "What did you want to discuss, Your Majesty?" "First, in these sessions you will call me Larasia. The formality is tiresome, and it creates distance I'm trying to eliminate." She poured a pale blue liquid into both glasses, offering him one. "This is Sharathi, a mild intoxicant by human standards. It won't impair your judgment, but it will help you relax." He accepted the glass but didn't drink immediately. "You're trying to get me drunk? I'm trying to get you to unbend enough to have an actual conversation," she corrected. "There's a difference. But if you prefer to sit there rigid as a steel beam, by all means don't drink. I'm sure we can have a delightful 2 hours of you giving me monosyllabic answers and staring at a point above my head." Despite himself, James felt his mouth quirk slightly. "Are you always this direct?" "When necessary." She sipped her own drink, her eyes never leaving his face. "I've found that humans respond better to honesty than to the elaborate dance of indirect communication my people prefer. So yes, I'm direct. I want to know who you were before grief turned you into this automaton. I want to know what made you laugh, what fascinated you, what you dreamed about as a child. I want to see the person you're hiding. That person doesn't exist anymore. I don't believe that. She set down her glass and leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the first time you looked up at the stars and thought about traveling among them. It was such an unexpected question that James answered before his defenses could stop him. I was 7. My grandfather took me camping in the mountains. We were far from any cities, and the sky was so clear you could see the Milky Way stretched across it like a river. He pointed out the constellations, told me their stories, and then he said something I never forgot. He said that somewhere up there, someone might be looking back at us, wondering the same things we wondered. That night, I decided I wanted to meet them. And you did, Larasia said softly. You joined the space service. You traveled to other worlds. You met other species. You lived the dream of that 7-year-old boy. I suppose I did. James took a small sip of the Shirathi. It tasted like honey and starlight, if starlight had a flavor, and spread warmth through his chest. What would that boy think of you now? The question was gentle but pointed. Would he recognize the man sitting before me? James was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. He wouldn't. Then perhaps it's time to reintroduce yourself. Larasia rose from her chair and moved to the window. Tell me about Sarah, not how she died. Tell me about who she was when she was alive. Every instinct James had screamed at him to refuse, to deflect, to maintain the walls he'd built around those memories. But something about Larasia's tone, about the genuine interest in her eyes, made him want to answer. She was brilliant, he began slowly. She could look at an alien organism and intuitively understand things that took others weeks of study to figure out. She was funny, too. Had this dry sense of humor that could catch you off guard. She loved terrible puns. Used to make them constantly during briefings until our commander threatened to revoke her lab access. A smile touched his lips at the memory, the first genuine smile in months. She was fearless about her work but terrified of heights. Refused to stand near windows in tall buildings. She collected old books, actual paper books, even though they were impractical to transport between postings. She said they smelled like history. She sounds remarkable, Larasia said. She was. The smile faded. And then she was gone. How did you meet her? James found himself talking, the words flowing more easily than he would have expected. He told her about serving together on the exploration vessel Magellan, about late-night debates in the observation deck, about the gradual realization that friendship had deepened into something more. He talked about their first kiss, about the proposal he'd carefully planned during a survey mission to a moon with bioluminescent forests. Larasia listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions that drew out more details. By the time 2 hours had passed, James realized he'd been talking almost continuously. More than that, he realized the constant ache in his chest had eased slightly. The memories still hurt, but sharing them had somehow made them more bearable. That's enough for tonight, Larasia said gently. You've done well, Commander. James, he heard himself say. If I'm to call you Larasia, you should call me James. Her smile was radiant. James, then. I'll see you tomorrow evening. As he left her study, James felt exhausted but also strangely lighter, as if he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for too long. He slept better that night than he had in months. The sessions continued every evening. Larasia was relentless but never cruel, pushing him to engage with emotions he'd suppressed while simultaneously teaching him about Cytherian culture, philosophy, and art. She introduced him to their literature, which existed as a form of structured light projection that engaged multiple senses simultaneously. She took him to their gardens, where plants had been engineered to respond to emotion, blooming or retracting based on the feelings of those nearby. "Watch," she said one evening in the palace gardens, approaching a cluster of what looked like crystal flowers. As she neared, they slowly unfurled, their petals catching the light and fracturing it into rainbows. They respond to curiosity, to joy, to wonder, the full range of positive emotions. She gestured for him to approach. James moved closer, and the flowers remained open but didn't expand further. "They're not reacting to me." "Because you're not feeling anything," Larasia said matter-of-factly. "You're observing with detachment. Try feeling something." "I don't know how," he admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. "Yes, you do. You've just forgotten." She placed her hand on his arm, and he felt a jolt at the contact. Her skin warmed despite its alien texture. "Close your eyes. Stop thinking about what you should feel and just experience this moment. The smell of the garden. The sound of the water in the fountains. The warmth of the air. My hand on your arm. Don't analyze. Just be." It was harder than it should have been. James's mind wanted to catalog, to maintain distance, to observe rather than participate. But he forced himself to relax, to simply exist in the moment as she'd instructed. Gradually, he became aware of subtle sensations he'd been blocking out. The gardens smelled like vanilla and rain. The fountains created a peaceful counterpoint to the soft murmur of night insects. Larasia's hand on his arm felt surprisingly right, an anchor in the sensory experience. When he opened his eyes, the crystal flowers had expanded dramatically, their petals now fully extended and pulsing with soft light. "There," Larasia said quietly. "You felt something." They responded. "What did I feel?" James asked, genuinely curious. "Only you can answer that." She removed her hand from his arm, and he was surprised by the sense of loss. "But you felt it. That's progress." As the weeks passed, James found himself looking forward to the evening sessions with an intensity that would have alarmed him if he'd allowed himself to examine it too closely. Larasia was unlike anyone he'd ever known, human or alien. She was imperious and gentle by turns, demanding and patient, infuriating and fascinating. She challenged every assumption he'd made about himself, about grief, about survival. He was forced to acknowledge, extraordinarily attractive. It wasn't just her physical beauty, though that was undeniable. It was the intelligence in her eyes, the way she moved through the world with absolute confidence, the unexpected vulnerability she occasionally showed when speaking of her own losses. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing small details. The way she gestured when excited about a topic. The rare, genuine laugh she gave when something truly amused her. The slight furrow that appeared between her brows when she was concerned. He told himself this interest was purely intellectual, a natural response to spending time with someone fascinating. He absolutely did not acknowledge the way his heart rate increased when she smiled at him, or the warmth that spread through his chest when she praised his progress, or the way he found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day. Larasia, for her part, seemed satisfied with his progress but never entirely pleased. She pushed him constantly to engage more deeply, to feel more intensely. And slowly, grudgingly, he began to respond. The world around him gained color and depth. Food began to taste like something other than fuel. The beauty of Cythera Prime started to penetrate his consciousness in ways that went beyond intellectual appreciation. But with the return of positive emotions came the return of grief, sharper and more painful than the numbness he'd wrapped around it. There were nights when he lay awake, overwhelmed by the loss of Sarah, by the future they'd never have, by the crushing weight of knowing she was gone forever. He considered canceling the sessions with Larasia, retreating back into the comfortable emptiness where nothing could hurt him. But he didn't. Something kept him returning every evening. Some stubborn part of himself that refused to give up despite the pain. Or perhaps it was Larasia herself. The way she looked at him with those amber eyes as if she could see through every defense, every excuse, every attempt to retreat. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet during their session, she confronted him directly. "You're pulling back," she said, setting down her glass of Shirathi with enough force to make it clink sharply against the table. "I can see it. You're trying to rebuild your walls." "I'm tired," James said, which was true but not the whole truth. "You're scared," Larasia corrected. "You started to feel things again, real things, and it terrified you. So you're attempting to retreat back into your safe little fortress." "Maybe I should," James said, meeting her eyes. "Maybe you were wrong. Maybe some fortresses exist for a reason." "No." Her voice was fierce, and she stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "No, I won't let you do this. I won't let you give up when you're so close to breaking through." "Close to what exactly?" James demanded, his own frustration boiling over. "What am I supposed to be breaking through to? More pain? More grief? Congratulations, your little project worked. I feel things again, and it's agony. Is that what you wanted?" "It's a start," Larasia said, and there was something vulnerable in her expression now, something raw. "Yes, you're feeling pain, but you're also feeling other things. I've seen you smile. I've seen you laugh. I've seen you look at the stars with wonder instead of emptiness. You're alive again, James. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means I remember what I've lost," he said quietly. "Every moment of happiness just reminds me of what I'll never have again. Sarah is dead. That doesn't change, no matter how many feelings you force me to experience." "You're right," Larasia said, surprising him. "Sarah is dead. That will never change. But you're not dead, James. You're here. You're living and breathing and capable of experiencing the full range of human emotion. And yes, that includes grief and pain. But it also includes joy and wonder and connection. You're so focused on what you've lost that you can't see what you still have. What you could have." There was something in her tone, in the intensity of her gaze, that made James pause. "What do you mean?" Larasia looked away, and for the first time since he'd known her, she appeared uncertain. "I mean that grief doesn't have to be the end of everything. That it's possible to honor what you've lost while still remaining open to what might come. That," she stopped, seeming to struggle with the words, "that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. Is that what you did?" James asked softly. "After your losses?" "Eventually," she admitted. "Not quickly, not easily. But eventually I allowed myself to remain open to possibility, to connection, to the chance that even though I'd lost people I loved, there might be others worth loving in the future." The implication hung in the air between them. James felt his pulse quicken, felt the careful distance he'd been maintaining begin to crumble. "Larasia, I'm not asking you for anything," she interrupted quickly. "I'm not making demands or expecting declarations. I'm simply telling you that the capacity you had to love Sarah, to plan a future with her, to dream of happiness, that capacity still exists inside you, and you can choose to lock it away forever, to build walls around it so high that nothing can reach it. Or you can choose to leave the possibility open, even if it terrifies you, even if it feels like a betrayal." "Loving someone else would be a betrayal," James said, the words coming out harsh. "Would it?" Larasia challenged. "Would Sarah want you to spend the rest of your life alone, shut away from any chance of happiness? Or would she want you to live, truly live, even if that eventually meant loving someone else?" James wanted to argue, to defend his loyalty to Sarah's memory. But the truth was, he knew what Sarah would have wanted. She'd been too vibrant, too full of life herself, to wish emptiness on him. If their positions had been reversed, he would have wanted her to find happiness again, no matter how much the thought might hurt. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You don't have to know right now," Larasia said gently. She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "All I'm asking is that you don't close yourself off, that you remain open to the possibility. Can you do that?" James looked into her amber eyes and saw not just the queen who had challenged him, pushed him, demanded that he engage with life again. He saw someone who had her own scars, her own losses, her own vulnerability. Someone who had somehow, despite his best efforts to remain detached, become important to him. "I can try," he said finally. Her smile was brilliant and relieved. "That's all I ask." But the truth, James realized as he left her study that night, was that Larasia had been asking for more than she'd acknowledged. And he had been giving her more than he'd intended. Somewhere in the past weeks, she had become more than a challenge, more than a curiosity. She had become someone he thought about constantly, someone whose approval mattered, someone whose absence created a hollow feeling in his chest. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the final wall crumbling, like stepping out of a fortress he'd built to protect himself from pain only to discover that the fortress had become a prison. He was falling for her. Had been falling for her, probably since the first time she'd looked at him with those piercing amber eyes and accused him of cowardice. The admission, even to himself, felt monumental. It felt like a betrayal of Sarah and a step forward into an uncertain future all at once. Over the following days, James found himself viewing their interactions through a different lens. Every smile Larasia gave him felt significant. Every casual touch seemed charged with meaning. He caught himself wondering what it would be like to kiss her, to hold her, to hear her say his name with something other than friendly challenge in her voice. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. He felt like a teenager experiencing attraction for the first time, all-consuming and confusing and overwhelming. Except he was a grown man who had loved and lost, who knew exactly how much pain could follow happiness, who understood that opening himself to these feelings meant accepting the possibility of devastating loss. Larasia seemed to sense the shift in him, though she didn't comment on it directly. Instead, she began to reveal more of herself during their sessions. She told him about her youth, about the responsibilities of being born into royalty, about the loneliness of a position that set her apart from her people. She spoke of past loves, some of whom had died, others who had left, all of whom had shaped her in ways both positive and painful. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked one evening as they sat in the gardens. "Loving them, knowing you'd eventually lose them?" Larasia considered the question, her fingers trailing through the luminescent water of a small fountain. "I regret the pain of loss," she said slowly. "But I don't regret the love itself. Each person I've loved has added something to who I am. They've expanded my capacity for joy, for compassion, for understanding. Would I trade the happiness we shared to avoid the pain of losing them? No, never. Even knowing how much it would hurt? Even knowing." She turned to look at him, and the intensity in her eyes made his breath catch. "Love is always a risk, James. Always a gamble that the joy will outweigh the pain. But I've found that it does. That even the briefest connection, the shortest love affair, adds more to life than a century of safety and solitude." "You think I'm a coward," James said. It wasn't a question. "I think you're scared," Larasia corrected gently. "There's a difference. A coward never fights. You're fighting. You're here, despite every instinct telling you to run." You're opening yourself up despite the fear. That's not cowardice. That's courage. James reached out without thinking, taking her hand. Her fingers interlaced with his, cool and smooth and somehow perfect. I don't feel very courageous. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she said. It's acting despite the fear. It's choosing to be vulnerable even when vulnerability terrifies you. It's allowing yourself to feel even when feeling hurts. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the garden. James felt the crystalline flowers responding to their proximity, blooming wider and brighter. He wondered what emotion they were detecting. Hope, perhaps, or possibility, or the tentative beginning of something he wasn't quite ready to name. "Larasia," he said finally, his voice rough, "what are we doing here?" She squeezed his hand gently. "I don't know," she admitted. "I started this with the intention of helping you heal, of breaking through your walls and forcing you to engage with life again. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than that." More than what? More than just an intellectual exercise. More than just a challenge. She met his eyes, and he saw his own uncertainty reflected there. "I told myself I was doing this because I couldn't stand to see potential wasted." And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. James felt his heart pounding. What's the whole truth? Larasia took a breath, and he realized she was nervous. The unshakable queen who had commanded his presence and demanded his emotional engagement was nervous. "The whole truth is that I'm 300 years old, James. I've known thousands of people, loved dozens. I've experienced more than you can imagine. And yet somehow, a grieving human military advisor caught my attention in a way no one has in decades. You fascinated me. Your pain fascinated me. Your strength fascinated me. And the more time I spent with you, the more I wanted to know. The more I wanted to be the one to help you heal." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because," she said simply, "somewhere between the first conversation and now, I fell for you. And I didn't expect that. I didn't plan for it. I thought I could remain detached, that I could help you without becoming entangled myself. But I was wrong." James felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. "You fell for me." "I fell for you," she confirmed. "And I realize that's probably the worst possible thing I could say right now. You're still grieving Sarah. You're still struggling with the idea of feeling anything at all. The last thing you need is a possessive alien queen declaring feelings you're not ready for." She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "But I promised you honesty. So there it is. The complete, uncomfortable truth." 1,000 responses ran through James's mind. Denial, deflection, a careful retreat back into professional distance. But he'd spent months building walls, and Larasia had spent weeks tearing them down. He found he didn't want to rebuild them. Not now. Not with her looking at him with such vulnerable honesty. "I'm not ready," he said carefully, and saw her expression begin to close. "But I'm not saying no either. I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, you became important to me in ways I didn't expect and don't fully understand. I'm saying that when I think about the future now, you're in it, and that terrifies me because it feels like I'm letting go of Sarah." "You're not letting go of her," Larasia said firmly. "You're making room for something else alongside her memory. There's a difference." "Is there?" James squeezed her hand, holding tight as if she were an anchor. "Because right now, sitting here with you, holding your hand, wanting to kiss you, it feels like betrayal. Like I'm choosing to move on when I should still be mourning." "How long should you mourn?" Larasia asked. 6 months? A year? A decade? Tell me, James, what's the proper duration for grief? And who decides when you've suffered enough to be allowed happiness again? I don't know, he admitted miserably. There is no proper duration, she said. There's no timeline that says after X amount of time, you're allowed to feel joy again, to love again. Grief doesn't work that way. It's not something you graduate from or complete. It's something you learn to carry alongside other emotions. Sarah will always be part of you. But that doesn't mean you can't also have room for new experiences, new connections, new love. James looked down at their joined hands, human and alien fingers interlaced. What if I can't? What if I'm too damaged, too broken? What if I hurt you? Then you hurt me? Larasia said with a shrug that was probably meant to look casual but came off as anything but. I'm risking just as much as you are, James. Perhaps more. I'm offering my heart to someone who's still in love with a ghost. Someone who might never be able to fully open himself to me. Someone who might leave when his assignment is complete and never look back. But I'm willing to take that risk because what I've found with you, even in these few weeks, is worth the potential pain. You're insane, James said, but there was no heat in it. Probably, she agreed, but I've always been a bit mad. It's one of my more charming qualities. Despite everything, despite the turmoil of emotions churning inside him, James laughed. It was a real laugh, genuine and unforced, the sound surprising him with its intensity. Larasia's face lit up with delight. There, she said. That's what I wanted. That's what I've been working toward. Not declarations of love or commitment. Just that. The ability to laugh despite everything. The capacity to experience joy even in the midst of confusion and fear. You're very pleased with yourself, James observed. I am, she admitted shamelessly. I set out to make you feel again, and I've succeeded beyond my expectations. The fact that I fell for you in the process is an unexpected complication, but not an unwelcome one. Complications rarely are in the moment, James said. It's later, when they become problems, that you regret them. Are you trying to talk me out of my feelings? Larasia asked, amused. I'm trying to be realistic, to protect you. I don't need protection, she said firmly. I need honesty. Can you give me that? James thought about it, about everything he'd been feeling, about the tangle of emotions that Larasia had deliberately created in him. Finally, he nodded. The truth is, I don't know what I'm feeling half the time anymore. You've turned me inside out. Every defense I had, you've demolished. You've made me feel things I wasn't ready to feel, and I resent that even as I'm grateful for it. He took a breath, forcing himself to continue. The truth is, I think about you constantly. I look forward to our sessions with an intensity that has nothing to do with duty or protocol. When you smile at me, I feel something warm in my chest. When you touch me, I don't want you to stop. And that terrifies me because it feels too soon, too fast, too much like a betrayal of everything I had with Sarah. But, Larasia prompted gently. But, James continued, I also know that Sarah would hate what I've become. She would hate the empty shell I turned into. And she would probably approve of you in a way. You're brilliant and challenging and completely unwilling to accept anything less than complete honesty. She valued those things. That's not a ringing endorsement, Larasia observed, but she was smiling. It's the best I can do right now, James said. I'm not ready to say I love you. I'm not ready to make promises about the future. But I'm willing to keep trying, to keep opening myself up, to see where this goes, even though it scares me. That's enough, Larasia said softly. She raised his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss to his knuckles that sent electricity racing up his arm. That's more than enough. From that night on, Their relationship shifted into something new and undefined. They continued their evening sessions, but the pretense of cultural education fell away. They simply spent time together, talking about everything and nothing, gradually learning each other's patterns and preferences and peculiarities. James discovered that Larasia was fiercely competitive, that she loved strategy games and hated to lose, that she had a secret fondness for terrible human entertainment vids, the more melodramatic the better, that she was touch-starved despite being constantly surrounded by people, craving the kind of casual physical contact that her position usually prevented. He found himself seeking excuses to touch her, a hand on her shoulder when making a point, sitting close enough that their arms brushed, taking her hand when they walked in the gardens. Each touch felt significant, a small declaration that he was trying, that he was willing to risk connection despite his fear. Larasia, for her part, seemed determined to prove that love didn't have to be fragile or fearful. She was bold in her affection, unashamed of her feelings, willing to be vulnerable in ways that both impressed and intimidated James. She would look at him with such open warmth that he felt exposed, as if she could see every doubt and every tentative hope. "You're staring again," he said one evening, catching her watching him with that intense amber gaze. "I'm appreciating," she corrected. "There's a difference." "What are you appreciating?" "The way your face changes when you're relaxed. The way you gestures when you're excited about a topic. The fact that you're here with me instead of hiding in your quarters." She tilted her head, considering. "The way you're trying so hard to let yourself be happy. Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. I've been watching you very carefully." She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "May I kiss you, James?" The question stole his breath. It was so direct, so quintessentially Larasia, asking permission even as the intensity in her eyes made her desire clear. James felt panic and anticipation warring inside him. This would be a line crossed, a point of no return. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. "Then we won't," Larasia said simply, though he saw disappointment flicker across her face. "I'll wait until you are. I'm very patient when I want to be." But James found he didn't want her to wait, didn't want to let fear dictate his choices anymore. Larasia had been right about so many things. Maybe she was right about this too. Maybe moving forward didn't have to mean forgetting the past. "Wait," he said as she began to pull back. "I didn't say no. I said I don't know if I'm ready. But I want to try." "James, you don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted. "I'm scared, and I'm probably going to overthink this afterwards, and I might even regret it. But right now, in this moment, I want to kiss you. So yes, please." Larasia's smile was radiant. She cupped his face in her hands, her skin cool and smooth against his. "Tell me if you want me to stop," she murmured, and then her lips were on his. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning. Her lips were softer than he'd expected, with a texture that was similar to but subtly different from human lips. She tasted sweet like the sharathi they'd been drinking, and something else he couldn't name. James felt his eyes close, felt himself leaning into the kiss, felt the last of his resistance crumbling. When they finally pulled apart, he was breathless and slightly dazed. Larasia was watching him with concern and hope mixed in equal measure. "Regrets?" she asked quietly. James took stock of his feelings. He felt guilty, yes. The memory of Sarah hovered at the edges of his consciousness, a bittersweet reminder of what he'd lost. But he also felt alive in a way he hadn't in months. Warm, connected, present in the moment instead of lost in grief. "Some," he admitted honestly, "but less than I expected. And what I'm feeling right now," he paused, searching for words. It doesn't diminish what I had with Sarah. It's different, separate. Both things can be true at once. Both things can be true at once, Larasia repeated, looking pleased. That's wisdom, James. You're learning. I had a good teacher, he said, and kissed her again. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of professional duty and personal exploration. By day, James continued his work on the defense grid, now nearing completion. By night, he spent time with Larasia, their relationship deepening into something that felt increasingly significant. They talked about the future with cautious honesty. James's assignment would end in a few months. He would be expected to return to Earth for his next posting. Larasia, as queen, was bound to Cythera Prime by duty and tradition. The logistics of a relationship between them seemed impossible, a fact they both acknowledged without quite knowing how to address. I could request an extension of my assignment, James offered one night as they lay together in her private chambers, watching the 3 moons rise through the crystal ceiling. You could, Larasia agreed, but you'd be delaying the inevitable, not solving it. Eventually, you'd have to leave. Your career, your life, everything you've built is in the human territories. Then come with me, James said, knowing even as he spoke that it was an impossible request. I'm a queen, James. I can't just abandon my people to follow you across the galaxy. She sighed, her head resting on his shoulder. I knew this would be complicated when I started pursuing you. I knew there were obstacles that might prove insurmountable. But I chose to pursue you anyway. Any regrets? None, she said firmly. Even if this ends when you leave, even if we only have a few more months together, it will have been worth it. You've given me something I didn't expect. Genuine connection with someone who sees me as Larasia, not just as queen. That's rare and precious. James held her closer, breathing in her unique scent, feeling the subtle differences in her physiology against his own. I don't want this to end, he admitted. Neither do I. So let's not think about endings. Let's focus on the time we have. It was easier said than done. James found his mind returning constantly to the approaching deadline, to the impossibility of their situation. He explored every option he could think of. Permanent assignment to Cythera Prime as a military liaison. A civilian advisory position. Anything that would let him stay without abandoning his career entirely. But the more he investigated, the clearer it became that there were no easy solutions. The alliance between Earth and Cythera was still new, still fragile. Personal relationships couldn't be allowed to compromise professional responsibilities. And beyond the practical concerns, there was his own complicated grief. He'd made progress, genuine progress, in opening himself up again. But the shadow of Sarah still haunted him, particularly in moments of happiness with Larasia. One night, Larasia found him in the gardens, staring at a memorial sculpture he'd commissioned for Sarah. It was a small thing, understated, depicting constellations they'd once watched together. He'd meant it as a way of honoring her memory while acknowledging his new life on Cythera. Instead, looking at it made him feel torn between past and present. You're thinking of her? Larasia said quietly, settling beside him on the bench. Always, James admitted. Less than before, which makes me feel guilty. More than I should, which makes me feel like I'm cheating you. You're not cheating me, Larasia said firmly. I knew what I was taking on when I pursued you. I knew you loved her. I knew you'd always love her. I accepted that because I wanted you anyway, complete with your grief and your memories and your complicated feelings. That can't be easy for you. It's not, she admitted. I'm possessive by nature, James. My people's psychology tends toward fierce attachment to chosen partners. Every time you think of her, Every time you look sad, every time I know you're comparing what we have to what you had, it hurts. It makes me want to be enough to make you forget her entirely." She paused, her hand finding his. "But I also know that's not fair. That's not how grief works. And demanding that you forget Sarah would be demanding that you become someone other than who you are. Someone I wouldn't love as much. So I accept the pain because the alternative is not having you at all." James turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression. "You really mean that? I really mean that." She squeezed his hand. "But I also need you to understand something. I can accept sharing your heart with a memory. I can be patient with your grief. I can give you time to adjust. What I can't accept is being forever second. Being the consolation prize. The person you settled for because you couldn't have who you really wanted. That's not what you are," James protested. "Isn't it?" Larasia challenged. "Look at yourself, James. Look at us. You care for me. I know you do. But do you love me? Really love me? Or am I just a way to feel less alone? A distraction from grief that happens to come in an attractive package?" The questions cut deeper than James wanted to admit. He'd been so focused on his own emotional journey that he hadn't fully considered what his uncertainty might be doing to Larasia. She'd been patient, supportive, demanding when necessary but always willing to wait for him to catch up. But patience had limits, even for a queen who'd lived 300 years. "I don't know how to answer that," James said finally. "I don't know if what I feel for you is love or something else. I know that being with you makes me happy. I know that the thought of leaving tears me apart. I know that when I imagine my future now, you're in it. But is that love? Or is it just need? Just fear of being alone again? That's what I need you to figure out," Larasia said. "Because I can wait for you to grieve. I can wait for you to adjust. But I can't wait forever for you to decide if I'm worth choosing. If what we have is worth fighting for." She stood, looking down at him with eyes that held both challenge and pain. "I love you, James Fletcher. Fully, completely, with all the intensity my people are capable of. But I need to know if you can love me back. Not someday. Not eventually. Now, as I am. With all your grief and confusion and complicated feelings." She walked away, leaving him alone with the memorial and his thoughts. James sat in the gathering darkness, watching the moon's rise, feeling more lost than he had in weeks. He'd made such progress, had come so far from the hollow shell he'd been when he arrived on Cythera. But Larasia's questions had exposed a truth he'd been avoiding. He still didn't know if he was capable of loving someone the way they deserved to be loved. If he was capable of choosing a future with someone when he was still grieving the future he'd lost. The memorial gleamed softly in the moonlight, Sarah's constellations traced in luminescent crystal. James reached out to touch it, feeling the cool smoothness under his fingers. "I don't know what to do," he whispered to the sculpture, to Sarah's memory, to the universe at large. "I don't know how to let you go. I don't know how to hold on. I don't know how to be fair to her when part of me still belongs to you." No answer came, of course. The dead didn't offer guidance. They just remained, forever frozen at the moment of their death, leaving the living to figure out how to move forward without them. James spent the night in the gardens, thinking about Sarah and the life they'd planned, about Larasia and the life they could have if he was brave enough to reach for it, about grief and love and the terrifying risk of opening yourself to another person when you'd already experienced devastating loss.